There is a way to make Brexit work, not just survive it, but actually thrive outside of the EU. It's a model that promises growth, trade deals and a streamlined state. Some call it bold, others would call it brutal. But here's the truth, if we ever chose to go down that road, we might just make Brexit work, but we'd come to regret it bitterly. In recent months, the idea of transforming the UK into Singapore-on-Thames has made a conspicuous return to the political debate. Former Tory Chancellor Jeremy Hunt has urged UK Prime Minister Starmer to seize the Brexit freedoms to turn Britain into a low-tax, free-trading haven capable of thriving amid the global turbulence. In a speech loaded with nostalgia for the original Brexit dream, Hunt invoked Singapore's rapid rise in living standards as a template that Britain could emulate, if only it would cast off the burden of EU regulation. The concept isn't new. This is what leading Brexiteers like Nigel Farage and Jacob Rees-Mogg wanted back in 2016. They set their sights on a vision of Britain unshackled from the EU's social model, transformed into a hyper-competitive, deregulated economy. Farage recently wrote an article in the Daily Telegraph celebrating what he called the perfect time to finally slash EU-style regulation, claiming it would reinvigorate Britain's financial sector, free its markets and restore the Brexit dream. For its most ardent proponents, Singapore-on-Thames isn't just a metaphor, it's a blueprint, a stripped-back, laissez-faire economy, liberated from what they see as the continued suffocating grip of Brussels. And in one narrow technocratic sense, they're right. This may be the only internally consistent economic strategy that gives a Brexit dividend. But it's a model that would come at staggering political, social and moral costs. If the UK were to fully embrace this model, the short-term economic gains could be substantial. Markets would love it. The UK stock market would boom. Free from EU constraints, Britain could radically lower taxes, reduce public spending and slash regulation in areas such as labour rights, environmental standards, food safety, digital protection. This would dramatically reduce costs for businesses, increase profit margins and at least in theory make the UK really attractive for investment. In this scenario, the UK could also pursue a much deeper trade agreement with the United States and other non-EU powers. A deregulated economy free of the influence of EU legislation could result in a very speedy and really substantial free trade agreement with the US. This would be Brexit in its purest form, divergence not just from EU law, but from the entire European social contract. A Britain that competes not by offering better goods or services, but by being cheaper, looser and more flexible for business. This is what the hardline Brexiters always meant by taking back control. It was never about sovereignty in the romantic sense. It was about re-engineering the UK economy to serve capital more ruthlessly, by shedding the very protections on workers, the environment and the vulnerable that the EU's regulatory regime embodied. Yet the cost of this strategy would be immense. Deregulation might boost profitability, but it would do so by dismantling many of the protections that ensure the UK remains a civilised society. Lower safety standards would put workers and consumers at greater risk. Environmental deregulation would be disastrous. Food standards could be compromised in the name of trade flexibility. Animal welfare and online safety would almost certainly suffer. We could expect to be eating chickens so intensively farmed that they require to be chlorine washed just to be made safe. alongside US beef pumped full of growth hormones banned under EU standards. More profoundly, the tax cuts necessary to remain globally competitive in this model would demand savage cuts to public services, services that are already on life support. The NHS is in crisis, local government funding has collapsed, the welfare state has been hollowed out. Embracing the so-called Singapore model wouldn't just require austerity, it would mean completely tearing up the deal that we've had in the decades following the Second World War. The deal where the state provides decent public services, a safety net, and looks after the common good. Inequality and poverty, already at completely unacceptable levels, would get even worse. Social cohesion would fracture. Communities already suffering from a decade of cuts would fall further behind. This is not speculation, it's baked into the model. Singapore may offer prosperity for some, but it does so within a tightly controlled, top-down system that's far more authoritarian and disciplined than the UK's democratic framework could or should tolerate. Let's be really honest here. The notion of Singapore as a model for post-Brexit Britain is absolute fantasy. It's not a serious plan, it's a dangerous political slogan dressed up as a viable strategy. Crucially, the vision of Singapore that UK politicians invoke is actually a deeply misleading one. Singapore is often portrayed as a low-regulation, business-friendly utopia, a shining example of how a small state can thrive in the global economy. But this portrayal is, at best, a half-truth. Singapore is indeed very efficient, competitive and successful, but it's not deregulated in the way that Britain's Brexiteers imagine. Its success is built not on laissez-faire capitalism, but on state-directed capitalism. The Singaporean government owns or controls major sectors of the economy through state holding companies. Its low-tax model is underpinned by high levels of public discipline, a compliant political culture, and social policies that would be unthinkable in the UK. Perhaps most damning of all, Singapore suffers from significant income inequality. It has one of the highest Gini coefficients among developed countries. This is the measure of income inequality where higher numbers mean a bigger gap between rich and poor. Migrant workers, who form the backbone of the Singapore economy, have limited rights and are excluded from much of the welfare state. The cost of economic efficiency has been a stark two-tier society. In short, the version of Singapore promoted by British politicians is a fantasy, a convenient fiction that serves neoliberal objectives while ignoring the structural foundations of Singapore's real economic model. At its core, Singapore-on-Thames is not an economic strategy, but it's an ideological project. It's the latest incarnation of the neoliberal dream, a vision of society reordered entirely around the needs of capital, of business, disguised as pragmatism and progress. It offers GDP growth in exchange for societal degradation. It promises prosperity, but only for those already at the top. In that sense, it's entirely in keeping with the spirit of Brexit, not the sentimental version sold on buses and flags, but the cold, calculating version pushed by market investors, free market think tanks and right-wing media barons. For them, Brexit was never about national renewal. It was about escaping regulation, weakening the state and expanding the frontier for profit. Singapore-on-Thames is their endgame. It's a project that, in theory, could work for investors, for multinational corporations, for the few. But it would do so by abandoning the many. It would deepen inequality. It would erode democracy. It would be the final confirmation of Thatcher's declaration that there's no such thing as society. The choice before us is stark. We can build a post-Brexit Britain that invests in its people, protects the environment, defends animal welfare and labour standards, and takes inequality and poverty seriously, a country that values public services, social cohesion and the common good. Or we can chase the mirage of deregulated growth, delivering short-term profit at the cost of long-term damage to our democracy, our society and our planet. Singapore-on-Thames may offer an economic logic, but it's not a future rooted in justice, dignity or shared prosperity. Singapore-on-Thames may be coherent, but it's not just. It's just not democratic, and it's not the future that we need. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing. I'd be really grateful for that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.